When you write a methods pattern paragraph, you are not explaining what researchers found. You are explaining how researchers have been studying a topic and how those repeated choices shape what the field can and cannot know. This paragraph helps the reader understand that knowledge in a field does not appear randomly. It is produced through consistent research behaviors, and those behaviors matter. In this video, we are going to evaluate 3 methods pattern paragraphs. The first one has clear problems. The second one is mostly working but needs refinement. The third one is doing strong methods pattern work. For each paragraph, we will evaluate it step by step in the same order, so you always know what to look for and why it matters. Before we start, it helps to know where a methods pattern paragraph usually appears in a literature review. This paragraph often comes after a theme has been established, and sometimes after a debate paragraph. Its job is to explain why a theme looks the way it does or why a debate exists. It often appears right before a gap paragraph, because it helps explain why certain questions remain unanswered. It is also important to say explicitly that not every theme needs a methods pattern paragraph. You only write one when there is a clear, repeated research approach that is shaping what the field can and cannot explain. Before you write this paragraph, there is one decision you need to be able to make. You need to be able to look across a group of studies and identify the method choice that most strongly explains why the field can answer some questions easily and struggles to answer others. You are not looking for every method detail. You are looking for the repeated choice that defines the boundaries of knowledge in this area. You also need to be able to answer the same basic questions about each study in the theme. You need to know what method was used, who the participants were, where the study took place, and what kind of evidence was collected. These answers are not just notes. They are the raw material that allows you to see patterns, group studies, and decide what matters enough to write about. One important citation rule applies throughout this paragraph. Citations here should support claims about how studies were designed, sampled, measured, or analyzed. They are not here to support findings. If a citation is pointing to a result rather than a method choice, it does not belong in this paragraph. It also helps to hear the difference between vague and specific method language before we look at examples. Saying studies use surveys is vague. Saying studies relied on one-time self-report surveys administered during a single academic term, using a standardized engagement scale, allows the reader to actually picture the research. That level of specificity is what makes a methods pattern visible. Now let's look at the first paragraph, the one with clear issues. Most studies on student engagement have used surveys to collect data. Smith, 2018, used a survey to measure engagement among college students. Johnson, 2019, also used a survey to study engagement. Patel, 2020, surveyed students about their engagement levels. Garcia, 2021, collected survey data from undergraduate students. These studies show how engagement has been studied. The first problem appears in the topic sentence. It notices similarity, but it does not name a meaningful pattern. Saying that studies use surveys does not yet explain how research has been conducted in a way that shapes knowledge. This paragraph feels safe because it sounds accurate, but it avoids doing any real thinking about what the repetition means. The paragraph also lacks specificity. The word survey is repeated, but we still cannot picture what researchers actually did. We do not know whether these were one-time surveys, longitudinal surveys, self-report measures, or standardized instruments. Without that detail, the pattern stays shallow. The paragraph never explains what this approach allows the field to know. Surveys are useful tools, but this paragraph never tells us what they make possible, such as identifying broad trends or associations across large samples. Without naming strengths, the paragraph has no analytical balance. It also never explains what this approach limits. There is no discussion of what surveys cannot show, such as change over time, process, or depth of experience. Because of that, the paragraph never explains why the method choice matters. The paragraph lists studies one by one instead of treating them as evidence of a shared pattern. That pushes the paragraph into summary mode rather than analysis. Finally, the ending simply stops. It does not explain what this method's pattern means for the literature, or what remains unclear because of it. This paragraph fails because it notices repetition but never asks how that repetition shapes the field's knowledge. Before we move on, let's revise this paragraph the same way we revise in the other videos. The first thing to fix is not the middle. We are not adding citations, and we are not rewriting sentences yet. We start with the topic sentence and the ending, because those two sentences define what the paragraph is trying to do. Here is a revised topic sentence. Across studies of undergraduate student engagement, researchers have consistently relied on one-time, cross-sectional self-report surveys to examine engagement at a single point in time. Now we jump to the ending and revise that to match the purpose of the paragraph. As a result, this dominant reliance on one-time survey designs limits the field's ability to explain how engagement develops or changes over time, leaving questions about growth, decline, and responsiveness unanswered. Notice what we did not touch. We did not revise the middle yet. Once the paragraph knows what pattern it is naming and what consequence it is pointing to, it becomes much easier to see which studies belong and which details matter. Revision here is about meaning, not polish. Now let's look at the second paragraph, the one that is mostly working but still needs refinement. Across this body of literature, researchers have primarily relied on one-time self-report surveys to examine student engagement among undergraduate populations. Smith, 2018, Johnson, 2019, Patel, 2020. Multiple studies use cross-sectional survey designs to measure engagement at a single point in time, most often using standardized engagement scales administered during one academic term. Garcia, 2021, Nguyen, 2022, Lewis, 2022. These studies typically recruit large samples drawn from a single institution or a small set of comparable institutions, which support statistical comparison across groups and contexts. Martinez and Cole, 2023, Rivers, 2023. This approach allows researchers to identify broad patterns and associations between engagement and related academic or institutional factors across large samples. Patel, 2020, Garcia, 2021, Nguyen, 2022. However, because these studies capture engagement at only one moment, they provide limited insight into how engagement develops, fluctuates, or responds to changes over time. Johnson, 2019, Lewis, 2022, Rivers, 2023. The topic sentence is doing real work. It clearly names a specific methods pattern and tells the reader what to track. The description of the pattern is specific enough that we can picture what researchers typically did. We know the design, the timing, the population, and the type of measure. The grouped citations show that each part of the pattern is supported rather than assumed. The paragraph also explains what this approach allows the field to know. It names a clear strength, which keeps the paragraph analytical rather than critical. Where this paragraph becomes thin is in the consequence. The writer has identified a limitation, but has not yet decided which unanswered question matters most. If the paragraph stops here, the reader understands the method but still does not understand why the field remains constrained or what kinds of explanations are out of reach because engagement is treated as static. This is a common stopping point. The paragraph is accurate, but it has not finished its job. One more sentence explaining what the field cannot yet explain would complete it. Let's change this to, as a result, the field cannot yet explain how students move into, sustain, or disengage from engagement across semesters, or in response to specific instructional or institutional changes. This gives a clear consequence. Now let's look at the third paragraph, the one that is doing strong methods pattern work. Across studies of undergraduate student engagement, researchers have consistently relied on cross-sectional, one-time self-report survey designs administered to large student samples. Smith, 2018, Johnson, 2019, Patel, 2020, Garcia, 2021. Most studies measure engagement at a single point using standardized scales, typically collected during one academic term, which supports prevalence estimates and between group comparisons across institutions and student groups. Nguyen, 2022, Lewis, 2022, Martinez and Cole, 2023, Rivers, 2023. Many of these studies rely on common analytic approaches such as correlational or regression-based analyses that identify co-occurring variables rather than tracing change processes, which strengthens trend detection but reinforces snapshot claims. Patel, 2020, Garcia, 2021, Lewis, 2022, Shah and Kim, 2023. Although a smaller subset of studies includes follow-up questionnaires, mixed survey administrations, or brief qualitative prompts, these additions rarely shift the dominant design away from cross-sectional self-report measurement. Nguyen, 2022, Rivers, 2023, Shah and Kim, 2023. This dominant approach has been effective for showing which factors tend to co-occur with engagement, and for documenting where engagement appears higher or lower across student groups and settings. Johnson, 2019. Martinez and Cole, 2023. Rivers, 2023. At the same time, because engagement is captured as a static snapshot, this approach limits the field's ability to examine how engagement develops, fluctuates, or responds to instructional or institutional changes over time. Smith, 2018. Lewis, 2022. Shah and Kim, 2023. As a result, the literature can describe who is more or less engaged and which factors align with engagement, but it cannot yet explain how engagement evolves across time, or how it might be intentionally shaped through sustained practices or interventions. Garcia, 2021, Nguyen, 2022, Martinez and Cole, 2023, Rivers, 2023. The topic sentence clearly names a dominant pattern and frames it as repeated across the literature. The description of the pattern is detailed enough that the reader can visualize the research behavior of the field, including design, timing, measures, sampling, and analytic tendencies. The acknowledgement of variation shows how to handle exceptions without losing the pattern. The paragraph clearly explains what this approach allows the field to know, and keeps those claims tied to method capacity rather than findings. It also clearly explains what the approach limits and directly links those limits to unanswered questions. The consequence is explicit rather than implied. The ending states a clear consequence for the literature, and naturally sets up the need for different kinds of evidence in the next paragraph. One final boundary rule is important here. If you find yourself shifting from design to sampling to measurement to analysis, and each shift requires its own explanation, you are either starting a new paragraph or you need to choose which method pattern matters most. A methods paragraph works best when it does one clear job. At the end of your draft, here is a simple revision pass you can always use. Underline the first sentence and make sure it names a methods pattern rather than an author. Circle the last sentence and make sure it explains a consequence for the literature. Check that every citation supports a claim about method rather than findings. Check that every citation supports a claim about method rather than findings. Do not start by rewriting the middle. Fix the topic sentence and the ending first, and only then adjust the middle if needed. That is how you write, evaluate, and revise a methods pattern paragraph in a literature review.